This is an event hosted by the Work in Climate community. Again, I'm Richard Kim. The Work in Climate community doesn't have an official description yet for these events, but here's the unofficial description I've been working off of. Work in Climate is a positive, action-oriented community that helps remove barriers from people who want to work on climate. By fostering community, collaboration, and knowledge sharing, we hope to unblock folks seeking to work on climate and inspire them to take action, whether through job seeking, entrepreneurship, volunteer work, or organizing with others. We are a Slack-based community, and you can join us by signing up at workonclimate.org. Few logistics. This talk is recorded, and so if you don't want to be on screen, you're free to leave your camera off. We've decided that we're going to mostly have questions through the Zoom chat for now. We'll see how that works. And I think Benjamin and Ed are maybe inviting people to jump in with questions during the middle of the talk, and we'll see how that works as well. And then there's a Google Doc where we've set up where you can collectively take notes, and I'll drop that into the chat as well. And we just encourage people to kind of, if you're someone who likes to take notes as you go through, or if you just want to have a record, we can kind of take notes together. And I'll put that in the chat in a second. Okay, let's see. So on to introductions. So our guests today are Ed and Benjamin from the video conferencing platform Clowdr. Clowdr's mission is to reduce the climate impact of academic conferences, both by offering an engaging virtual alternative and by empowering others to build on its open source platform. Ed Nuttig is the CEO of Clowdr. He's an experienced developer with a passion for entrepreneurship and technology education. Benjamin Pierce is the Henry Salvatore Professor of Computer and Information Science at the University of Pennsylvania and a fellow of the Association for Computing Machinery. He has extensive experience with organization of physical and virtual conferences. He is deeply invested in reducing the climate impact of conferences, having chaired the ACM Special Interest Group on Programming Languages and served on the UPenn Faculty Senate's Climate Response Committee. Ed, sorry, yours was so much shorter. I accidentally cut off the end of your bio, but no feel free to fill in. And I'll let you guys take it away.
Thank you. So I'm Ed. I'm joining you from Bristol. I'm also technically still a PhD student at the University of Bristol in the UK. And so as Richard kindly said, I'm the CEO of Clowdr, and joining me is Benjamin.
And I'm Benjamin, and I am, as Richard said, involved with both Clowdr and faculty at University of Pennsylvania. Ed, next slide.
Keep going.
So I have been working with a number of people that are very concerned about the climate impact of academic computer science for years and years, and including Richard, by the way. A very interesting thing happened over the past couple of years. So in the old days, the conversation around what we could do about reducing the carbon footprint of academic conferences, which is huge, usually went something like this. We start talking about it. Oh, it has a huge carbon footprint. What can we do? Let's list lots of strategies. Well, could we just not have physical conferences and have people attend virtually? Yeah, we could talk about that, but actually, no, we should not do that. There are lots of reasons why we don't want to do that. And then in 2020, the conversation changed a little bit. In fact, it changed radically. It changed 100%. And guess what? All conferences are virtual, and we're in that world. So this presents an opportunity and a problem, and they're both the same thing. Namely, how do we demonstrate, how do we use the chance that we have this year to make virtual conferences so appealing to people that when the world changes back and they can go back to physical conferences all the time, they will not want to do it, or at least not quite so much. So this is the origin of Clowdr and what we're trying to do. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit more about why virtual conferences might be a good thing from a climate point of view. We're going to talk about the current state of play in the virtual conference world, and just briefly sketch kind of where we are now, what's good, what's bad, and then spend most of the time talking about where we see things headed, like what what are the challenges and opportunities and directions that things are going for the next year or two. Then we'll spend a little time at the end telling you just a touch about our platform called Clowdr, and at the end tell you that you and your friends should come and work for us. Next slide. Okay. And is this still me or is this over to you?
Yep, this is still you.
Okay, so so virtual conferences have actually a big opportunity to make a difference in the footprint of academia and research, and of course many other areas that are conference or meeting heavy. About 70% of the emissions from a physical conference come from flights and obviously most of the rest from hotels. By comparison, virtual conferences consume, depending on whose estimate you believe, somewhere between less than 1% up to maybe at most 10% of the total carbon emissions of a physical conference. So you can save big by making the event virtual. What that means in terms of individual emissions. So I, as an academic, go to usually several conferences a year, and that amounts to the vast majority of my personal carbon footprint. So just from an ethical point of view, as an academic, at the personal level, virtual conferences would make a huge impact on my and my colleagues' footprints. But it's worth mentioning that climate is not the only reason that virtual conferences are good. We've seen over the past year that that virtual conferences are vastly cheaper, like $30 versus $3,000 that you might spend to fly internationally and stay in a hotel and eat out every night. They are much more manageable from the point of view of you don't have to deal with airports and travel. There's no jet lag. You don't have to be away from home and family. They are significantly more accessible to people with disabilities, with caregiving responsibilities, with demanding jobs. They have the potential for much greater reach. We've been seeing typically twice the attendance at virtual meetings the past year as prior physical instances of the same meetings. So there are lots of reasons why we might want to keep going in the virtual mode. Over to you, Ed.
So I'll talk a little bit about virtual conference platforms. In the last year, we've seen a number of different ways of organizing a virtual conference. You can cobble together a virtual conference using Zoom and Slack and Discord. And for really small events, Zoom works well, like this one. But when you're talking about a full-sized academic conference, if you try to ask people to use Zoom and Slack and Discord, it gets quite scrappy. People don't like having to switch between 3 different pieces of software. They quickly lose where their messages were when they were trying to message their friend and catch up with them in one platform, and then they have to switch back to Zoom for the presentation, and where are they supposed to post questions, things like that. So the experience of using Zoom, Slack, Discord, these different tools that came from the kind of remote working industry and from the kind of gaming industry hasn't been that great. And as a result, people have moved towards the kind of integrated virtual conference platforms. And that's really where you pull together the content, the schedule, the social engagement, everything into one place, and hopefully one environment that people can access from any device, which typically means doing it through the web. Now, having said that, that means I can explain that we have sort of 3 classes of virtual platform. One of them is a typical web app, so things like Hopkin 2, Clowdr, and other similar kinds of platform. Then we have 2D spaces, so things like GatherTown and AirMeet, and to some extent OYay, platforms like that, where they're offering you a 2D environment that you can move around. Some of them are a bit like Mario games for people that have played those kind of things. And then the last kind of category is the 3D virtual environments. And really, those are very experimental at the moment. We haven't seen many full-scale conferences try to use a 3D environment such as Mozilla Hubs. People are still toying with what that looks like. So available today, as I mentioned, is Hopkin, Clouder, OEA, Gather, AirMeet, things like that, and they fall into these different categories. And Hopkin is probably one of the biggest, and Gather and Clouder and people are sort of in the open source and slightly smaller boutique end of things, and we're tackling different parts of the market. We'll talk a bit more about that later. But what's been good about these platforms so far? So at the moment, we tackle presentations and Q&As very, very effectively. We can do pre-recorded video. If these most of these platforms can stream out pre-recorded videos as well as live presentations. And then the best of these platforms can record those live presentations, make those recordings immediately available to people, or rebroadcast them in other times of day for other time zones, as well as doing things like capturing text chats, capturing text messages, making them available to session chairs, having them answered live, and recording those questions later. These platforms are also easier for most users to use, especially compared to a physical conference, having to travel to it. You don't have to travel to a virtual conference. You, in some cases, don't even bother rolling out of bed. You just open up your iPad and start engaging. Then you log in, you have all your home comforts, and you can have shorter days. You haven't got to travel in from your hotel to where the conference is happening. You haven't got a queue to get in and then find yourself sat at the back of the auditorium because you arrived late because your hotel breakfast was delayed when you were getting in, and then you haven't got to be stuck at the back of an auditorium just peering at a screen at a distance trying to work out what the presentation says, and maybe the audio's not so good so you can't hear the presenter. Whereas in the virtual environment, you can have it full screen on your screen, clear headphones. It's all very easy to engage with in that sense. And then lastly, we can break down barriers. So normally at a physical conference, if there's a group of people, maybe you want to talk to one of them, maybe you're a student and there's a senior researcher that you would love to go and have a chat about a conversation about a particular topic that you're interested in. That's a huge barrier to walk up and kind of try and raise that topic with them and have that discussion. Whereas in a virtual environment, you can just ping them a message and then try and arrange a time for a video chat maybe. Or you can drop into one of the kind of breakout rooms where they're at and see whether they're talking about what you're interested in there. Benjamin, over to you.
Thank you. But all is not rosy. There are indeed a lot of things that are still missing from virtual conferences. I think anybody that's been to virtual conferences over the past year would agree that that we're not there yet. And so we want to highlight a few, and then people can jump in and direct discussion where they're interested. But we wanted to highlight 4 areas that we see as particularly hard. And we will talk about those in order. So next slide. The first challenge that we see, and now we're talking particularly about the academic space, which is our home territory. Academic events, as we said earlier, are often very complex. They can have many, many tracks. A big academic conference could easily have 6 or 10 or even 20 or 30 tracks in parallel. At a big conference, you might have not 1,000 attendees, but 1,000 authors and session chairs and blah, 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 blah. So there are a lot of people to get where they're going and manage. The content can become overwhelming. So at a large academic conference, there might be hundreds of pre-recorded videos, slide decks, posters to manage. The schedule itself can become quite complicated, both to manage and maybe even more critically to present to attendees in a way that they can comprehend it and figure out where to go. The simple scale of the number of people that are there can be large. And of course, with scale of attendance comes scale of problems, let's say, with socializing. And so there may be lots and lots of things going on in parallel, lots of people. How do you find them? How do you figure out what's going on? How do you join in? Next slide. So socializing in virtual spaces, I think this is really the key problem. And it's an area where a lot of progress has been made. People have done good things. There are good ideas out there, but again, anybody who's been to virtual meetings knows we are really not there yet. It may not be possible to get all the way there to parity with physical conferences. Physical spaces are where we as humans are used to living. Virtual spaces are to some extent unnatural. But we do need to get much closer than we are now. If the other advantages of virtual conferences are going to tip things over into people choosing virtual quite a bit of the time. So what are some of the main problems? One really critical one is that the activation threshold, the barrier to entry, the psychological barrier to entry to getting into conversations in a virtual space is higher than in a physical space in using current technology. Just for sometimes kind of dumb reasons, like if you're supposed to meet in a virtual room, at least two people have to make the decision to go to that virtual room at the same time in order to have a small conversation. Otherwise, you're stuck with, we're 200 people in the same virtual auditorium and nobody is actually interacting at all. So how do we arrange? How do we let people know when they want communication or interaction? If I'm walking up to a conversation that's already going, how do I tell whether I'm welcome? How do I know what's being discussed? A critical one actually is that there are no social cues established in virtual spaces for leaving conversations. And that makes it hard to join conversations because you don't know how stuck you're going to be. There's no way of splintering a conversation and hiving off a couple to talk about something else. Second big category is the category of presence, the fact that it's hard to know who is there in the conference besides you. It's hard to see what other people are doing or even who is in the space. And one of the reasons why this is a hard problem is that increasing visibility is to some degree in tension with concerns of privacy. So, for example, you could imagine a system, and in fact, it would be quite easy to engineer a system where you could sort of tag people so that anytime they did anything in the system, joined a talk, left a talk, sent a chat message, joined a breakout room, you would get a notification and you could see that. That would make it a lot easier to see what your friends are doing. But is it a good idea? I think probably just from the description I've given, most people would agree, no, that is creepy. We do not want that. So where is the middle ground? How do you design interfaces and experiences for users that appropriately balance people's expectation of privacy and freedom from creepiness with their desire to see what other people, their legitimate desire to see what other people are doing so that they can find them and interact with them. And then the third category is just how to manage the sort of built-in differences between physical conferences and virtual ones, like screen fatigue, like the fact that virtual meetings are often much shorter. You have to pack the program and therefore think about the program differently. The fact that there are more distractions, etc. Ed, is that over to you? Or still me?
So
okay, go.
Hybrid meetings are coming. So right now for spring and summer, we're seeing that most things are remaining virtual. You look at the conferences out there and most things are still using entirely virtual spaces. But from the fall onwards, we're seeing people experimenting with hybrid. Initially with the, how can we get a local community? Maybe there's a community in California that wants to get together and then they want to have a virtual element that enables the rest of the global community to participate. So that's the kind of first step that people are taking. And then the second step is, how do we go to a full kind of anyone can travel from anywhere in the world, and then also have people participate virtually from anywhere in the world. And hybrid means a lot of different things to different people because there are lots of different approaches. And at the moment, there's sort of two approaches. One is the 98% physical. So you have a physical meeting and then you just live stream the talks that are happening. And maybe you also manage to pick up the Q&A and live stream that as well and put it out over YouTube and have people watch. Or the other way around, where you have a mostly virtual conference and then you gather people together physically just to watch certain aspects of it, but really they still participate through the virtual environment. So you've got these two kind of ends of the spectrum that people are reasonably used to doing. And then this kind of fantasy land where everything is seamlessly hybrid. So that I don't think anyone quite believes that we'll ever get to the point where there is this seamless transition between physical and virtual, and it doesn't matter which one you're in, you'll have the same kind of participation and experience. That's probably a dream. But what we can try to work towards is something a bit more realistic that does a better integration. And the thing to look at with the two existing models is they don't really tackle the social interaction between the virtual and the physical halves. They're very unidirectional. So you've got a presentation going from the physical out over the virtual, into the virtual environment, or back the other way, a virtual presentation being watched by people, but not the kind of group discussions that you would expect to have. And that's where we would like to kind of explore more. So maybe that looks a bit more like being able to have a kind of virtual environment with live stream stuff and on-stage content, and somehow make sure that the presenters that are in the physical environment get far more feedback from the virtual audience. Can we do things like clap tracks that make it more obvious when people in the virtual environment are showing their appreciation? Can we get Q&A to work better? Things like that. And then, but really key is the kind of joint technical sessions and what we phrase as interpenetrating social spaces. So perhaps that looks like what some people have experimented with, where you have a friend that carries around an iPad and points it in the right direction for you. So you're participating through the virtual, and then someone in the physical world is helping you join in the physical discussion and making sure you're kind of in the right place. So these kind of telepresence robots. Or maybe you push it the other way and you have a space in the conference where it's a quiet space. Everyone kind of has headphones and can join using their laptop or iPad or whatever it is, can then use that physical space to join a virtual meeting that's going on and try to best utilize that kind of environment. But beyond, and then, so that's realistic for 2021. We have the technology today to do that, and we have the resources and capacity to build those kind of interactions. But into 2022 and beyond, we see a kind of increasing opportunity and an increasing challenge with things like VR headsets. People have been talking about VR and AR since the 1980s. There have been prototypes for a very long time, but it's only in the last few years that we've seen consumer available devices and affordable devices, you know, affordable at the level of maybe your hotel provides you a VR headset with your room if you travel to a physical conference. Maybe that's something that we can start to encourage people to use and start to build these 3D virtual environments in an accessible way. And if you compare the cost of a VR headset now to traveling to a conference from the UK to the USA, the cost doesn't look that unreasonable. So there are some opportunities there in the future as devices get more powerful. But this kind of leads me into accessibility, which is web accessibility is contentious. And I don't mean that in the sense that if you ask someone, should we make things accessible? They're not going to disagree with you. It's contentious because of what users expect and the way users behave. So most users are very expectant of features and functions that are actually just fundamentally inaccessible. They expect things like colors to be distinguishing and for that to be the main indicator of how to use an interface. They expect to be able to point and click on certain things and then kind of forget about the keyboard or vice versa. When we look at 3D environments, every kind of 3D game I've ever played requires you to use the mouse in order to look around. That's really inaccessible for people with low mobility. And then there's the way that the kind of content creators operate. So authors and presenters are really generally not familiar with closed captioning. And live closed captioning is even harder. So if we ask people to provide captions with the video they upload, many won't even know where to start in terms of producing a suitable SRT file, for example. So We can achieve a lot. We can make some progress with what exists. So Chakra UI is a React UI framework that out of the box gives you all of the kind of ARIA accessibility properties that make you screen reader compatible, can help you build a user interface that's keyboard navigable, that meets color contrast requirements, so on and so forth. You can actually get a long way towards an accessible interface. And then we can also leverage the technology that's been built by big companies. So Amazon, for example, provide a system where you can do automatic subtitle generation. And so that, and thereby take away a lot of the effort from authors for doing closed captioning. You can give them a pre-generated thing from their video and offer them the opportunity to edit it. But still some challenges involved in that. How do we do multilingual captions? We don't know how to do that translation just yet. For things that aren't just slideshows, where you've got maybe a cycling tour of a city, how do we do audio description? There isn't a tool right now for automatically generating an audio description of a video. How do we deal with things like automatic caption generation doesn't work so well for non-USA accents? For anyone else in the world, okay, British English, we're kind of okay, you know, it works fine for me, but if you're Portuguese, sorry, you're going to have a really tough time with Amazon's current system. And then lastly, I sort of mentioned the 2D and 3D environments are largely inaccessible, but they're also inaccessible in unexpected ways. A lot of people get motion sick in 3D environments and playing 3D games, so we can't necessarily rely on that. And then there's accessible in the kind of digital access sense. In the Western world, a lot of people have browsers and software and laptops and hardware that's capable of running these big 3D applications, but does the rest of the world have that kind of access? And do we all have the kind of internet access necessary to run a 3D virtual environment? Possibly not at the moment, and maybe not for a long time to come. So I'd like to talk a little bit about Clowdr itself and what we've been doing to tackle some of these challenges. Primarily, our goal is to lower the carbon footprint of academic conferences by offering an attractive virtual alternative. What we mean by that is trying to make a virtual conference that is so good people don't miss elements of physical conferencing, that they're actually happy being in a virtual environment and using it in the future. Some of the key things that distinguish us from people like Hopin or GatherTown, we're 100% open source. Everything we do is open source, and as part of our kind of company, we are required to keep all current and future software open source. And we're specifically focused on the academic community. The academic community, as we sort of mentioned, presents challenges in terms of the complexity and size of conferences. So we're trying to tackle some of the issues that are specific to those kinds of event. And then in terms of the technical features that we're focused on, accessibility is a key focus for us. We're doing everything we can to make sure that the platform is accessible to everybody, all the way from hardware requirements through to screen reader compatibility and closed captions and all of those kinds of things. And then also presence and social features. We're really interested in trying to tackle that problem of visibility and making sure that we lower the barrier to entry for conversations and kind of generate a much better conversation in a virtual environment than we've seen to date. Benjamin, over to you.
In the interest of time, I suggest that we kind of skip over this. Clowdr's been going for a little less than a year and was started by people that really, really care about climate. That's all I wanted to say on that slide.
Okay, so I'll just give you a kind of brief look at Clowdr's interface. This is the landing page of a conference we just ran for FPGA. You can see there on the left, the auditorium had 200 viewers at the point when I took this screenshot. So we have some of the elements of presence in there. And when we're searching for papers, the screen reader can read out the number of search results, and the keyboard nav highlights very clearly where you're currently focused. And when we're looking at a particular item, we have closed captions for the various videos. This was a live recording, for example, that's been immediately broadcast. And we can try to present the information for the item, including all of its authors. Further down on the same page, we have the events. So we're able to navigate quickly back and forth in the schedule. And then in the chat that we have included features for kind of resizing the text, very large, very small, and also expanding and contracting the spacing and things, just to make it easier for people to engage with the text chat and have it configured the way they want. And then when you're writing a message, we can do things like answers, questions and answers that highlight them in the chat, and also do polls and things like that. So that's kind of a very brief overview of Clowdr's UI. And just to mention that we are hiring at the moment. So we're hiring for a front-end software developer to help us out. And if you've got an interest in UX, all the better. We would love to have someone on the team that knows more about the front end than my colleague Ross. Ross and I are sort of more back-end people. And then we also would like to find someone to help us with the DevOps side of things. We're using about 9 different services. We integrate 9 different third-party services to build Clowdr and make it run. And we would love to have someone on board that can help us with the DevOps and automatic deployment and all of that kind of side of things. So if you're interested in finding out more, please do check out on clowdr.org/jobs, and also have a look on GitHub, where you can find all of our work. Benjamin, do you have anything to add?
Thanks for coming, and let's have some discussion.
Thanks, guys. Maybe we should turn off the screen share on the
Good.
Yep, I will
video.
click that button.
I just have an initial question that I anticipate some folks watching this video may have. Regarding these jobs, are there any limitations in terms of geography for who might be able to apply, both in terms of eligibility to work and location?
Provided you're not living in a US or UK embargoed country, then you're absolutely fine to apply. We have no restrictions. We're a fully remote working company. Great.
Yeah, I just want to open it up for other people to ask questions. I've got a bunch if people are a little shy, but would anyone like to ask some questions? It looks like there's one in the chat here. Alexander, would you like to read your question, or would you like us to read it for you?
I can read it. So some traditional conferences tend to embed extra information in badges. For instance, domains of expertise, newcomers, pronouns, and so on and so forth. And the question is, A, is there something similar in Clowdr? So what I remember from previous conferences was only participant or presenter or conference organizer, but I mean, you can go more, you can do more in principle. And then if yes, can those badges be self-assigned? Specifically for pronouns, I would definitely prefer them to be self-assigned.
Yeah, we can
absolutely
do all of those things.
Yeah, for sure we can do all of those things. And I was just going to try and briefly share screen with you. So here you can see we've got the badges that you can create your own and assign a color, and we give you a kind of little preview of that. And then pronouns, likewise, it's completely free text, so you can create your own in there. So yeah, and then in chat we actually take your kind of first badge and highlight that in the chat as well, so other people can see if you're hiring, or if you're looking for a job, or if you're interested in a particular topic.
So you can show only one badge.
So on the profile, we show all of your badges, but in the chat, just for space, just because of the space requirements, we pick only the first one to highlight prominently.
One of the presence features that we're very serious about is any place you see somebody's name, you should be able to click or hover and see all of the information about them. So so we give just a little bit, one badge, but very easy access to finding out more about anybody that is visible on your screen.
And there's some other things we'd like to do with badges. Like we have a system for randomized kind of shuffle rooms. So we call them shuffle rooms. They're basically kind of like breakout rooms where you can go and join the queue and get randomly assigned to chat to people for a limited amount of time. And we would love to have a system where we can use the badges to pair people up if they have common interest.
I'm noticing that Keshav has their hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Benjamin. Just a quick question for you about this. I was, in your lead in to the Clowdr platform, you're talking about the informal discussion spaces like GatherTown and Hop Into and so on and so forth. But I didn't see any of that in Clowdr, so pretty curious what you support for those kinds of informal interactions. Thank you.
Yeah, so we have that is actually a concentration of the Clowdr platform. So we support also we support very lightweight creation of both public and private breakout rooms. So you can make breakout rooms that are restricted to a particular group or just a pair of people and have a video conversation there. You can create video breakout rooms. So any participant can create video breakout rooms for their own purposes, and then they're listed in the list of rooms. And if there are people in the room, then also anybody looking at the list of rooms will see who is in there at the moment.
Are you able to demo any of that in terms of a UI?
Sure.
I'm not going to try and demo it live right now. Live demos. Okay. I'm sure we all know that live demos are prone to.
But do you have a screenshot, perhaps?
Yeah, or at least show us what the UI looks like.
I can show you. Hold on, let me pull this up then. I'll show you it statically. As I say, I'm really not going to try and run things live. But
if you haven't sacrificed the goat recently, it's not going to work.
Yeah. But as we can see here, we've got the Clowdr UI open with the couple of sidebars, and in fact, I've got this on quite a narrow screen, so. On the left here, it's quite easy to then just click open a room, type the room name, set whether it's public or private, and then you can, if you set it to private, you can go and add people into it. And one of the things Clowdr does is it floats to the top of the list rooms that are active. So it looks at the ones that have people in them. If they're public or private to you, it will push them to the top of the list to make them more visible for you. And obviously there's an all rooms page as well, where you can go in and see numerous things going on. And we separate out the kind of program rooms where scheduled events are happening from the social rooms where people are just kind of enjoying themselves. And one thing we're adding this month is also the ability for organizers to set up kind of mentoring type events through the shuffle spaces, so they can create a bunch of rooms, allocate a mentor to each room, and then everyone else joins in and gets randomly assigned to those mentoring spaces. So that gives you a kind of idea of what Clowdr looks like.
Great. Does that answer your question, Keshav?
Absolutely. And just for, I'm looking into, I'll be general chair for a conference later this year, and this is something we definitely would like to look into. So I'll get in touch with you guys independently on this.
I look forward to talking.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Ohad Kamar had a question in the chat that I think might be worth asking explicitly. Do you want to ask it, Ohad? Okay, Ohad maybe is in a place where they're not able to type. Yeah, I'll just read for you if that's okay. Ohad writes, I like the open source community interest company. I have experienced Clowdr firsthand, and it has improved substantially over 1 year and has serious prospects in this domain. That's a thumbs up, guys. Do you guarantee you will remain this way into the future? Will you stay good? No,
yeah,
I mean,
so
that was my addition, the last sentence.
Yeah, the last little bit.
So not only will we stay good, but we have to stay good. Our incorporating documents that register as us as a corporation in the UK promise that our software will be 100% open source forever.
And I'll take that a little bit further just to point out that because we're a community interest company, which for those in the US, it's a little bit like a B Corp. It's not quite the same, but it's a social enterprise. But because we're a community interest company, we can't get bought out by a large private organization that then tries to close source all our software. Like this is not an option for us. And there's a UK regulator, the CIC regulator, that enforces this. So it's sort of, now we've set ourselves up in this way, it's no longer within our control to stay committed to it.
Chad Doherty has their hand up.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I was wondering if you see this being extended to like a conference tutorials and workshops, just supporting sort of the training materials, exercises, sort of the more educationally focused parts of a conference as well.
It's a great question. So it's being used now for conference workshops and tutorials, and we have some amount of support for example, event presenters to upload things like documents and slideshows and video to the area of the platform that's assigned to their event. So yeah, we do have some capabilities in that direction.
The key limitation right now from a technical perspective is the limitation of WebRTC video. So when we're operating in Zoom here, we can have a large number of videos on because they have their own kind of software and their own complete environment that they can control. If we were to use Zoom through the browser, you're then under the same limitations of WebRTC. And in the browser, the best we can kind of achieve is maybe 20 videos at once if you've got a really powerful machine, but and a really good internet connection. But really, we're limited to less than 10 videos at a time and up to sort of 50 people on audio. And then we have to kind of invent mechanisms whereby someone's got it switched on, but if they're not actually active, then they get muted and hidden, and the most active people are made available. So when you're in like 100-person rooms, then the system has to do a lot of kind of compensating. But WebRTC is progressing quite quickly. And as the encoding technologies improve, a lot of things are still running on what's called VP8 encoding, which is now a few years old. It's VP9 is its successor. So as we see these technologies get greater adoption, then and greater support in the hardware, then the browser will become more and more capable of running these kind of video environments.
I'm wondering if you guys can talk a little bit more about the jobs you have open. Like what will these folks be working on sort of immediately, and what do you sort of see as, yeah, just kind of describe, put us a little bit more into what it will be like to work at Clowdr.
Sure, yeah. So my colleague Ross has actually joined us here. You can see him on video there. So Clowdr is a fully remote working company. Ross and I both happen to be in Bristol, but the rest of the team is in the US and all over the place. The front end role that we've got in the short term is tackling many of the UX challenges we have. So we have issues with things like use of vertical space, and there's lots of information. How do we condense that information in a way that's really easy for people to navigate? Clowdr has an interesting UX challenge in that if you're Zoom, people come and reuse Zoom frequently. So there's a certain amount of work that you can expect a user to put into learning the interface. But with Clowdr, it's not uncommon for people to be using us for the first time on the first day of the conference, use us for a week, and then not be coming back for another 6 months. So we have to make sure that the interface is designed in a way that someone can drop into it, just start using it, even though there's a huge amount of information that they need to get out of it. Enjoy the experience and then go away again without having to put in lots of time and effort to learn how to use the platform. So that presents some really interesting and unique UX and UI design challenges. And that's something that we would like front-end developer that we hire to take on and tackle. In terms of the back-end and DevOps role we have, as I said, we're integrating a large number of different services while also trying to be open source. So right now, if you try to take the open source project and get it set up for yourself, it'll take you a day or two, even if you're an experienced developer, just to get all of the services set up and follow our READMEs and things. We'd love to be able to condense that down into a much easier to deploy system, maybe something through Docker or, Ross, what's the name of the other deployment engine that someone recommended to us? You're muted, so.
Things like Pulumi and Terraform, where your entire application infrastructure is defined as code, and it's essentially a one command to deploy everything. Would be great for getting people from the community to be able to actually contribute directly to Clowdr and help us build stuff together.
Yeah. So things like that. And then we also have big challenges in terms of testing. This is a big, complex platform, and a lot of it relies on real-time video and real-time chat. Chat is a particularly difficult scaling problem. Thanks, Keshav. And then, so how do we test that, and how do we make sure it scales? And then how do we make sure that we're not spending large amounts of money running load tests through Vonage video services, but also making sure that we can still support kind of large environments whenever we make changes? So yeah, I think there's some questions coming in the chat.
Can I just add one note to that, Ed?
Yeah.
In case everybody hasn't realized, it's worth underscoring that we are a quite young and still quite small company. So we are just at the beginning of, we have a platform that's solid, still needs lots of things added, but conferences are using it successfully, even big ones. So we are just at the beginning of what we hope will be a massive scale up effort over the next year or so. And so all the specifics that Ed said about these positions are true. And what's also true is that this is an opportunity to get in on the ground floor of something that we hope will be quite a bit larger and doing a lot of exciting stuff in a year or so.
The role that you're looking for, it sounds like it's someone on the front end. It sounds like it's someone who can both do UI at a pretty high level as well as do front end coding. Are you interested in people who are more UX specialists or UI specialists who have less of the coding background?
So in a really short term, well, I'd say in the really short term for like the role that we can offer today, we need someone that can code. In the medium term, sort of over the next 6 months or so, then yes, we'll be interested in the UX role. So if you're interested in that side of things, please do get in touch and start talking to us on that kind of timescale. So someone's asked in the chat regarding UX challenges, do we have capacity for short-term research projects, for example, co-supervising undergrad MSc projects? I think, Benjamin, you're probably best placed to answer that.
Yes, and I did in the chat say, yes, we are interested in doing that kind of thing. If people have good students that want to try out research projects or internships with Clowdr as a base, we would love to talk.
Yep.
And then Richard Wellesley has a question about ACM SIGMOD. Looks like that was answered.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Great. Any other questions? I certainly have some, but I'd be happy to have other people ask.
Jump right in.
I'm interested a bit more in the slide that you skipped over, Benjamin and Ed, which is like, kind of why academic conferences? How does this tie more into climate? Like maybe, roughly speaking, what your climate journey was, although I actually kind of know some of it, but yeah.
Yeah, so you've been a co-traveler on some of this journey, but so it started for me a few years ago, just realizing that the world was full of big problems and I needed to put my shoulder to one of them. I chose climate. Spent a few years organizing or chairing a climate change committee within SIGPlan, which is the ACM special interest group on programming languages, which produced several reports about carbon offsetting and things like that. Then what happened a year ago was Krista Loesch sent a message around just at the beginning of the lockdown and said, guys, this is the moment. This is the moment when virtual conferences get a chance to show what they can do. And we should really grab it because that's the biggest impact we can make on the carbon footprint of academic conferences. So she and I and Keshav, who was here a minute ago, and 6 or 8 other people formed a committee to write a report for the ACM on kind of best practices and advice for virtual conferences. That came out in, if I remember right, April-ish last year. And basically the result of that exercise was realizing that the technology for presenting talks was okay, it was kind of there, but the technology for socializing was not there. that we really needed better integration. We needed better ideas for how to get people socializing and networking in virtual spaces. And of course, being hackers, the next step after that was starting to build our own thing. And that was the beginning. So it was first used at the Big Software Engineering Conference, ICSE, last June, if I remember right. And then at various programming language and software engineering conferences over the summer and fall. At a conference late in the summer, we had the good fortune to run into Ed, who brought a quite interesting mix of climate change, climate commitment, being a super hacker, and entrepreneurial experience. So he became our CEO, and his partner in crime, Ross, became our CTO. And we kind of, spun the whole thing up into a company during the fall. We have now, so we've run 6 or 8 large conferences and some smaller ones. We have many more scheduled for the rest of the year, and we just hired a business manager that we hope is going to be the beginning of this scaling up process that I mentioned. So that's a little bit of the history of the company.
Mm-hmm. Ed, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, yeah, so my background really, I was a PhD student at the University of Bristol, and I'm sort of finishing my PhD at the moment in the kind of PL and hardware design space. So I come from a kind of different background, but I've done web tech stuff for a long time. Clowdr is my kind of 3rd business that I've tried. And when I kind of joined Benjamin and Krista and Jonathan, I didn't, at the time, wasn't aware that I was going to end up involved in Clowdr the business. I looked at it and sort of went, this is really cool. The virtual conference platform they had was solving a really interesting problem. It was certainly a lot better than any of the Slack and Discord and other tools that people had tried. And I sort of went, well, maybe I can improve some of the open source bits. Maybe I can go and fix up some of the stuff with the video room layout, and that kind of spiraled into maybe I should do some more UI work, and then maybe we should turn this into a bigger project. And for me, I've been interested in doing a kind of social enterprise type thing for a while. So, climate is one of the biggest challenges facing us. And I wanted to find a way to take the skills in the technology they had, but also the skills I had in terms of the business incubator I'd been through, and the kind of entrepreneurial knowledge, and combine that into something that really tackled climate change and tackles in a meaningful way, in an impactful way. And that's really why Clowdr appealed to me as a project to contribute to, and then to take it forward into being a business to actually grow it. It's only going to make an impact if we can reach thousands and thousands of users and actually hundreds of conferences. At the moment, we are in the scale of doing a few conferences, and I'm looking forward to expanding that over the next year.
Do you have a sense of what the potential market size / carbon impact might be for Clowdr?
The potential market size is very large. Just in the ACM, there are how many? It's a few hundred conferences.
Order 160 conferences.
Yeah,
and
just
each of
run by
those,
ACM.
And each of those might be like between 100 and 1,000 participants.
200 to 20,000 participants.
And each of those might account for maybe 1 metric ton of plane flights.
Maybe a little more.
Yeah.
2 or 3.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe on the scale of hundreds of thousands to millions of metric tons potentially avoided.
Right, and that's just one computer science academic organization. So if you did all of computer science, it would probably be, I don't know, 10 times that much. If you did all of the sciences, what percentage of all sciences is computer science? I don't know, but not a very big number. And then what percentage of all academia is that? Is again So it's a huge potential market.
And then if you look at the kind of, the law and medical conferences are huge. And that's an area that we would love to try and tackle and has their own kind of challenges. And then there's also some elements to virtual conferencing that we haven't really talked about yet. And I don't think I've really heard many people talk about them, but when you have sponsors of physical conferences, they love to give away stuff. And stuff means it's been manufactured. Whereas at a virtual conference, we can do goodie bags that are kind of virtual and digital, and perhaps particularly to the computer science community, more meaningful. You know, who wants a pen over a free software license key? You know, that kind of thing. So there's some other kind of secondary effects that we can have.
Excellent. Well, we're almost out of time. I wonder if we've got maybe one more question if anyone has it. Looks like we're good. Maybe if you guys can drop into the chat just where people can look at the source code on GitHub.
Yep, so that's just github.com. Actually, Ross, can you type it out? I'm set up for streaming right now. But yeah, so github.com/Clowdr-app. And then the main repository is in the one called Clowdr. It should be reasonably easy to find.
Okay.
So.
All right. Well, thank you, Ed and Benjamin. Great to have you. Great to hear what's going on. I'm going to drop a bunch of links into the chat now. Work on Climate, you can find more at workonclimate.org. Our Google Doc, where we've been taking notes, I'll drop in right here. And then traditional in our community is that you are invited to share one thing you learned on our events thread, one thing you've taken away from this talk, and that thread is there. And then finally, Clowdr itself. Thanks so much, guys. Really great to see you. Great to hear what you're doing. And any last words?
Thank you very much,
Richard, for the excellent hosting, and thank you all for coming.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. See you online.
Bye.
Cheers.